Welcome to the rebroadcast of Aging and Long-Term Services Senior Day Special Event, Blue Zones Bout, presented by Ancorum Health Foundation. I'm Paul Schroer, Cabinet Secretary of the Aging and Long-Term Services Department in New Mexico. I hope you enjoy hearing from Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham, Dan Buettner, who is a National Geographic Fellow and Netflix docuseries producer, as well as Ancorum Health Foundation. Thank you so much for being here. We are going to go ahead and get started with our first speaker today. It is my absolute honor to introduce our incredible governor of New Mexico. A 12th generation New Mexican, Michelle Lujan Grisham, is currently serving as the 32nd governor of New Mexico and is the first Democratic Hispanic woman in the U.S. history to be elected governor. That's right. That deserves a woo. She is driven by a deep compassion for seniors and those living with disabilities. Our governor was appointed as the first ever cabinet secretary for Aging and Long-Term Services Department, which means I have massive shoes to fill. No pressure. She has carried that torch and passion into her governorship, prioritizing investments in healthcare infrastructure and innovative programming to improve access and quality of care for New Mexicans across the state. Please join me in welcoming Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham.
Well, good morning. That's a very nice, warm welcome. And I'm going to guess that's because you're all going to go and get a lot of money from the legislature, and people are feeling remarkably good about that. This is an interesting new concept, and actually I want to give the secretary and her team, also special recognition, because it's not actually how I roll. And if those of you, I'm looking for some oldies but goodies. He's old, Bob Lujan. Raise your hand, Bob. You're now eligible, me too, to go to the very programs that we invest in. And I want to talk about that just a second, because I think this is the team could actually do some interesting work to put it back together. We have a tendency in the United States, in my view, to sort of ride a roller coaster of priorities. And part of this presentation today is recognizing that a sense of community, which now everyone is studying for all age groups, that somehow in America, we lost that. But it's also important to recognize in America that we don't live in cohesive family units. And what's fascinating about this work that you're going to hear about today by an amazing researcher, author, speaker, docu-series leader is that what we've long known in other countries like Japan is that sense of family and community, healthy eating, healthy starts. Just take a look at what you get at a school system in Japan versus what kind of meals you get in a school system in the United States, and including right here. We haven't really done it right. But in order to get to a place where we're leaning into healthy aging, healthy sense of self, the fact that Hispanics and Native American elders in particular are now seeing longevity shifts in the right direction, but aren't all in a situation to be able to live independently or with dignity. So I'm going to do three things. One, most of the money that we are leaning into in the aging budget is all about living independently and high quality. Fits with this theme, but we are nowhere near that aspect. And to put that in perspective, at 8:30 last night, I talked to an 86-year-old man for about 45 minutes. This gentleman who lives in southern New Mexico has a family member, a daughter, an adult daughter who doesn't speak, has never been ambulatory, and has lived in a long-term care facility for more than 30 years. In this long-term care facility, he's the only family member who visits. There are more than 100 people who live there. They aren't doing very well. There's no sense of community. They're isolated and lonely. And at 86, he wonders what will happen to his daughter when he's not around. He checks in every day, gets all of her vital signs at every shift because she can't communicate. It's the only way that he can create a baseline. He has every bit of vital statistics for the last 30 plus years for every shift, 7 days a week for that facility. Now, I'm going to tell you, that facility doesn't have those records. I promise you that. They're supposed to, but I promise you that they don't. This concept of New Mexicare, which is slow to grow, so this is the group that's going to grow it, and aging will lead it, is that that sense of community should be able to be transferable anywhere, but it ought to be readily available for families in their homes where they are. And it isn't. And the dignity for people wherever they are receiving care has to still be our highest priority. And I fear that it has gotten lost in all of the work that we do, the Department of Health and the Department of Human Services with Medicaid, and working so hard to make access to drugs and primary care and all the things that most of you here are experts at. We have to take all that expertise and make sure that we're delivering it right back to the families who I think are still feeling disconnected, no sense of community, isolated, out there on their own. 2, we've been committing that we're going to put a bunch of money in. And that goes for the private sector too. If we really want to do that, it's all about dignity, living well, having a sense of purpose. To get there, people have to have healthy food. They can't be impoverished. They can't be sick. They can't be lonely, and they can't be isolated. So if we don't lift those pieces up, and every single one of us, me included, has that responsibility in this state. And I'd like to see us all rededicate our own sense of purpose to that very effort, because I think we have a long way to go. We slipped. I want a helping hand so we can all stand right back up and do that work. 3rd, aging network. You know, we have a whole system out there that I think is also now isolated and alone. And COVID did that system no favors. But we know how to reinvest in those networks, in those communities. And this morning, I specifically asked to our former governors and our leaders in any number of pueblos and nations, some of the best community work in the world happens at sovereign nations. But I bet you are feeling a sense of disconnect with your elders and about where they are and what they're doing. Let's go back to some of those basics. Let's revisit supporting all of that work. Let's make sure that New Mexico, as I guess it's called blue zoning, that blue zoning would be synonymous with making people feel like they've got the choices to make to be independent and active. And I would submit that today, far too many New Mexicans are not feeling like they have those supports. And I know I'm supposed to end, and I actually have a hard stop, but I promised last year I would go to 50 senior centers, and some folks from the Aging Network might remember that. Raise your hand if you remember that. Okay, I did not make it. I went to about 12. That's 12 too few. I've committed again, and I need to do it by a hard stop, like by July. Would you send all of your suggestions about where you'd like me to visit, both to show me what's working and to show me what isn't working? Because I lost my mom last April, and I want to make sure that in these journeys that are both beautiful and hard, that families just like me and just like my 86-year-old, I hope, new friend, that they are feeling like there's someone they can talk to who will lean in and change the status quo, who will think about how aging affects not just the person, but the whole family. And I want to be in a place where no caregiver, no family member feels like they didn't do enough because they didn't have enough support to do the things that they desire. How many caregivers here today? How many of us still feel guilt? And we feel guilt because it's so hard. So blue zoning ought to be, it shouldn't be this hard. How about that? All right, so we're going to get to 50 centers. Can I deduct the 12 or do I have to start from the very beginning? Oh God, this is you tough crowd. All right. So we'll end up at 62 and then I'll just brag about that. Thank you for your commitment, your passion, your dedication, your work. Enjoy this incredible view about where we ought to be headed. Make sure that when you're talking to legislators, they don't forget that we have a long way to go in aging and in family community development. And I promise to do my part, but I'm going to need everyone in this room to recommit to doing the work, to bring dignity, respect, hope, opportunity back to the aging network and families in New Mexico. Thank you all so very much.
Thank you, Governor. And we are excited to have the governor join us again at 11:30 for Senior Day at the Capitol. So while New Mexico is not yet a blue zone, as of the 2020 census, there are 410 centenarians in New Mexico, which is a 44% increase from 2010. Through collaboration with community leaders, policymakers, and dedicated individuals, I am confident that we can set a precedent for a healthier, more fulfilling future for all New Mexicans. In championing the cause of making New Mexico a blue zone state, the Aging and Long-Term Services Department is not only embracing a vision of longevity, but also fostering a legacy of well-being that will resonate for generations to come. And I don't know about you, but I believe we can do better, and I believe New Mexicans deserve better. And I know it's the people in this room that are going to help make that happen. And now it is my honor to introduce our keynote speaker today. When I first found out about the Netflix series, The Blue Zone, I had just come into this role. And I had always had a perception that there were certain things needed to be able to have longevity with a long lifespan, quality care, and it all revolved around communities that had a lot of money and metropolitan areas with a lot of resources. And it was refreshing to see that the blue zones that Dan Buettner coined several years ago, the common threads within those communities were not that. There are rural communities. There are communities that were below the poverty line. There are communities that they like their pasta. I love pasta. But as I was watching the blue zones, I said, you know what? This is possible here in New Mexico. And I'm so privileged that we were able to connect with Dan Buettner. Because when I said I wanted to bring him here, everyone kind of looked at me like I was bananas. But I am so grateful that we were able to get connected with him through Netflix, because we have a great film industry here, don't we? That's right. And we were fortunate enough to have people believe in this vision and want to support us to get here. So I really want to thank Ingram Health Foundation one more time, because truly they made it possible for us to get to the finish line to bring him here. Thank you.
Well, I want to thank Quorum. I want to thank your amazing governor and her office. I want to thank all of you who decided to spend your morning with us today, and also the watch parties out there. I don't think you guys probably realize how important exactly what you're doing is and how rare it is across the country. I've had a chance to speak in probably 40 out of the 50 states, and it's very rare you get this kind of a turnout with this kind of a endorsement at the very top. And this is when work actually gets done, and this is the work that really moves the dial on health and longevity. I'm going to talk about the world's longest lived people and the lessons they offer us as individuals, but more importantly to your work as communities. And my goal here is to present an audacious vision for the state of New Mexico, not only to be a blue zone, but perhaps to be the healthiest state in America. And it's well within our grasp. Something called the Danish Twin Study established that only about 20% of how long we live is dictated by our genes. The other 80% is something else. So based on that premise, with a grant from the National Institutes on Aging and with an assignment from National Geographic, I set off to, in a sense, reverse engineer longevity, to find places around the world where people are living statistically longest, and then reverse engineer it. So once you find the places where people have achieved the outcomes we want, and this is largely not only living to 100, that's only one small marker. The better marker is they have the lowest rate of middle-age mortality. And essentially, they're getting to a healthy age, 90 or 95, without diabetes and heart disease and avoidable cancers and dementia. They have what we want. They live a long time, they die quickly, and they leave a lot left over for their heirs. So to find the correlations, I surrounded myself with experts who could help me go into the scientific literature and use the available strategies and techniques to find the correlations. We used anthropology, epidemiology, and just plain old reporting in many cases. Remarkably, no matter where we went and found extraordinary longevity, we found the same common denominators, the same 9 factors in every place. And I'm going to tell you what those 9 things are. And the big insight, this took me 8 years. I'm a little slow. It took me 8 years to realize it, that longevity is never successfully pursued, at least not on a population level. It ensues. It is the product of having the right environment. And the environments in blue zones are remarkably consistent. No matter where you go in the world, see long-lived people, they're not exercising. I don't want to badmouth exercising, but I will tell you it's been an unmitigated public health failure in America. Fewer than 25% of us even get that 20 minutes of physical activity that I ask people to raise their hands to. So it's not working very well. People in blue zones are getting about 8,000 to 10,000 steps a day without even thinking about it. Because every time they go to work, every time they go to a friend's house, every time they go out to eat, it occasions a walk. They have gardens out back. They all have gardens. Great longevity strategy because it nudges you into weeding or watering or harvesting. Their houses aren't full of the mechanical conveniences that do our work. They're doing yard work with a machete. They're doing housework by hand. They're grinding corn by hand. They're kneading bread by hand. My team figures that they're nudged into physical activity every 20 minutes unconsciously. And it doesn't hurt, but yet it burns more calories and it keeps their metabolisms running higher all day long than the sort of folly that we buy into, that we're going to go to work for 8 hours and then we're going to make it up at the gym. And first of all, that's not how humans evolved. Our bodies were built to move all the time. And secondly, most of the time we don't show up to the gym. So the Blue Zones approach, I'd argue, is better. Secondly, they have sacred daily practices to downshift. They're one of the most popular theories on aging in the last 20 years is something called inflammaging. Inflammation, chronic inflammation, is at the root of every major age-related disease. A lot of it comes from the unprocessed food and the meat and cheese and eggs we eat, but also a lot of it just comes from the stress of the American condition. The big advantage people in blue zones have are strategies to help unwind that stress, to to downshift. The Adventists have their prayer. They start every meal with a prayer. They wake up in their prayer. It's a form of meditation and de-stressing. The Okinawans have ancestor veneration. I think a lot of people in this room will recognize the importance of remembering our elders and relinquishing our day to our elders and respecting our elders. This is something they do every day. The Costa Ricans and the Acadians take a nap, which is a great way to lower cortisol levels. People who nap every day have about a third less cardiovascular disease. And then in Sardinia, well, they just do happy hour, which is what I've adopted. They have vocabulary for purpose. Plan de vida, ikigai. I've talked a little bit about that, but purpose comes with mother's milk here. And it can't be emphasized the importance of it here in the United States. When it comes with what they consume, they do drink a little bit. And I know there's lots of controversy around alcohol right now, and it's out of vogue. But I can tell you that in blue zones in the Mediterranean, over 85% of people over 90 drink almost every day. But it's homemade wine, and it ends at 2 glasses a day, and they're small glasses, except for maybe a festival. But I can tell you, drinking doesn't seem to be mutually exclusive with living a long life as long as it's done in moderation. What do they eat? Took me 8 years to come up with this next slide I'm going to show you. If you want to know what a centenarian ate to live to be 100, you have to know what she was eating as a little kid and middle age and newly retired and lately. You can't just ask them what they've been eating lately. And that's what most journalists do. So we found 155 dietary surveys done over the past 100 years in all 5 blue zones. We did something called a meta-analysis with Harvard. And here is the real diet of longevity. They're eating 90 to 100% whole plant-based food. About 65% of it is carbohydrates. And I know carbohydrates are often a dirty word. I think carbohydrates the worst word in the dietary dictionary because jelly beans and cookies, they're the most toxic elements of our diet, whereas lentil beans and whole grains are the best. The 5 pillars of every longevity diet in the world are whole grains, greens, garden vegetables. I left one out here, tubers, like sweet potatoes, nuts. If you're eating a handful of nuts a day, it's associated with 2 extra years of life expectancy. And the cornerstone of every longevity diet in the world, beans. Yeah, my bean brethren. If you're eating a cup of beans a day, it's probably adding 4 years of life expectancy over less healthy forms of protein. I would have loved, and don't kick me out, but I would have much rather seen a big servings of beans rather than those 2 sausage links this morning for breakfast. But that's just me. I'm kind of a bean fanatic, though. They do eat meat. Blue Zones is not a vegan. It has no vegan agenda. People in Blue Zones ate about 20 pounds of meat a year. It was a celebratory food. Not every day. But to compare that with the United States, the average American eats 240 pounds of meat every year, another 300 pounds of dairy. If you're eating meat more than twice a day, your chances of type 2 diabetes, cancers of the GI tract, and cardiovascular disease goes up by a factor of about 3. There we go. They do eat fish, a lot less than we think. So I have to keep craning here. No cow's dairy in any of the blue zones. They do eat sweets, but it's for celebration. And then when it comes for what they drink, water, 6 glasses a day, teas of all kind. Good news for most of us, coffee, number 1 source of antioxidants in the American diet, and then a little bit of wine. But more important than what they eat, what they don't eat, they have strategies to keep from overeating. They eat breakfast like a king, lunch like a prince, dinner like a pauper, and then they don't eat for 12 to 14 hours. They eat with their family. We know in America, if you're eating with your family, you're eating less and more nutritiously. And they're not eating to their favorite TV show. There's no screens in the kitchens of blue zones, so they eat slowly. They say some grace, they put some punctuation between their busy life, and they express some gratitude, and then they eat. And then finally, the foundation upon which all of this rests is how they connect. This is probably 50% of the blue zone strategy. Putting your family first. And I don't mean this in a political sense, I mean in a real sense. It's keeping your aging parents nearby. On a national level, putting older people in a retirement home, on average, they lose 2 to 6 years of life expectancy. I know there's lots of examples where their situations got better, but that's not the norm. Investing in your partner or your spouse. Married people live significantly longer than unmarried people, whether you're divorced or single. And by the way, marriage is much better for men than it is for women, which probably is not a big shock, but and then investing in your kids, which is not only a really good workout, but if you invest in your kids, it's less likely they'll stow you away in a retirement home when you get old. Belonging to a faith. I'm not a particularly religious person myself. I got no agenda here, but I've read the research. People who go to church, temple, or mosque and show up 4 times a month live 4 to 14 years longer than people who don't. We don't exactly know why. It might be because you have a better social network, less likely to get involved in risky behaviors. It's downshift every week. It just works. And I would argue, by the way, that 4 to 14, the 14 years accrue to inner city minorities. Get them involved in a religion. I would argue it's the most cost-effective public health intervention. Get people involved in churches. And I don't care what church it is, but it works really well. And then finally, and this is the most actionable for most of us, curate your immediate social circle. We know that if your 3 best friends are obese and unhealthy, there's a 150% better chance that you'll be overweight. If your friends drink too much, if they do drugs, if they smoke, it's all measurably contagious. Even unhappiness is contagious. So taking a cue from blue zones like a Moai and curating your immediate social circle so you have a few people whose idea of recreation is walking or gardening or pickleball or tennis or biking, of friends who you can count on a bad day, not just backslapping friends. And then finally, it's not a bad idea to have a vegan or vegetarian. Oh, now the people are leaving. Vegan or vegetarian friend, because they're going to show you how and where to eat, to learn to like whole food, plant-based. I cannot emphasize enough the power of a whole food, plant-based diet. The longest lived Americans, this comes from the Adventist health studies, are either vegans or eating whole food, plant-based diet, or pescatarians. The average 5'8" American who's eating a plant-based diet weighs about 20 pounds less than their meat-eating counterpart. Not to say there's not place for meat, but backing off on it sure does your body a favor. So people look at this pyramid and say, this looks like common sense to me. But it's not common sense. Fewer than 10% of Americans live a life anywhere near this. In America, we spend a paltry 4% of our $4.4 trillion healthcare budget on prevention. And most of that prevention is on diets, supplements, and exercise programs. And I'm not here to badmouth any of those necessarily, but I'll tell you they're not very good investments. We spend well over $100 billion on them every year. And if you look at the recidivism curve, best diet in the history of the world, get 100 people on it today, in just 3 months, you lose 10% of them. In 7 months, you lose 90% of them. And in 2 years, you lose almost all of them. If I were your financial planner and gave you this return, you would fire me. Yet every year, New Year's Day, 80 more million. Well, this year I'm going to do it. And it never works. Same thing with exercise programs. We start with a lot of zeal after the holidays. We run out of gas by September. And even if I come home from the blue zone with a pill guaranteed to reverse aging, Americans wouldn't take it long enough to make a difference. So if that doesn't work, what does? Very clear message from Blue Zone. Very clear. This took me 20 years. People in blue zones are eating wisely. They're moving unconsciously, naturally every 20 minutes because their life is underpinned with purpose. They surround themselves with the right tribe, their moai, and they live in places where the healthy choice is the easy, affordable, accessible choice. And the secret to longevity doesn't lie in any one of these circles. A marketer will find one of these circles, I will sell it to you. No, it's in the interconnected, mutually supporting nature of these 5 things that help people keep doing the right things and avoiding the wrong things so they don't develop an unnecessary chronic disease. So in other words, it's the sum of small daily improvements, most of them unconscious, deployed over not years, but decades. That's what works. And it works everywhere in the world where we have manifest longevity. So I have 15 minutes left and then I'm done, right? 15 minutes. The boss says, all right, 15 minutes. 10 minutes. Okay, 10 minutes. I'm wrapping up in 10 minutes here. But this is the best part because I'm going to give you the secret. 2009, I wanted to manufacture Blue Zone. I looked for all the places in the world, World Health Organization, CDC, to try to find places where people were unhealthy and got healthier. There's only one on the planet. It was in Finland, a place called North Karelia. It had the highest rate of cardiovascular disease in the world. 55 years, people were dropping dead. One guy, a young epidemiologist named Pekka Puska, came in and he tried the same public health, education, diet, exercise, all that crap, and it didn't work. Blew through most of his budget. Then he got the idea to change the environment to make the healthy choice, the unhealthy choice harder, more expensive, and the healthy choice easier. And over the course of 20 years, they dropped cardiovascular mortality by 80%. This is astounding. This is in the British Journal of Medicine. This isn't in, the Sun or the Mirror or something like that. It's a real. So I flew out there and I spent a week with those guys and I learned. And of course, Finland isn't America. Every place who wants to do this, it requires some morphing and adopting. But I went out, I got $1 million grant from AARP, I still thank them, to build an American Blue Zone, manufactured Blue Zone. And I began with the realization that you're never going to change individuals. We are genetically hardwired to crave fat, crave sugar, crave sausage links, and take rest whenever we can, crave salt. You're never going to override that. You can incent people, you can educate people, you can scold people. It's your individual responsibility. But when you put them in a shitty food environment, they're never going to raise out of it, or we haven't seen it yet. So instead of trying to change individuals, we set them up for success by changing their environment. Research shows that we spend about 80% of our time in within 5 minutes of our homes and work. So that's what we would optimize. And we take a 3-pronged approach. We bring a team in for 5 years. One team focuses on people and gets a critical mass, 15 to 20% of individuals who take a Blue Zone pledge. And it's free for them, by the way. When we come into a city, it's free for individuals. We give them checklists and experts to help them go into their homes to change their kitchens and the rest of their homes so they mindlessly eat fewer calories and move more. We actually create moais, match people up with a new social network, and then give them a purpose workshop and help them to volunteer. We then administer a Blue Zone certification program for all the grocery stores, workplaces, restaurants, schools, and faith-based organizations. And we offer this Blue Zone certification if you just change your designs and your policies so people mindlessly move more, eat better, socialize more, and people have a chance to know their purpose and put their purpose to work. And we can usually get 30% or 40% of all places certified. And then finally, and this is the big one, this is the heavy. And by the way, it doesn't work at the federal level, as far as I know. Policy. CDC, best investment if you want a healthier community, optimized policy. So my teams, and I think, the best team in the world, who've aggregated evidence-based food policies that favor healthy food over junk food and junk food marketing. They favor the non-smoker over the smoker. They favor the pedestrian and the cyclist over the motorist. You can raise the physical activity level of an entire city by 20% by going from a traffic choked city to one that favors walkability and bikeability. And then we have alcohol policy that allows for freedom, but it's fine tuned. So you have the fewest DUIs and alcohol programs. And we don't come in and we don't tell city council what to do. We simply offer Blue Zone certification. If the public and private sector will come together in each of these 4 policy bundles and find which ones are most effective here, because every place is different, and which ones are most feasible here. And when you have everybody in the room, including the mayor and the city council, it's amazing how 6 or 8 of them just float up to the top. I put somebody on my team who's like a chihuahua on your pant leg, and make sure that these policies get implemented and passed and enforced, and we get her done. So that's the model. And in my remaining 5 minutes, I'll just quickly take you through a couple of our blue zones. Albert Lee, Minnesota, where we came in. This was our very first one. We got them to put sidewalks on connecting all 4 neighborhoods. Convince them to they had this lake at the edge of town, to take some freeway money and build a pass so people could very easily come and walk, to replace all the lawn that Parks and Rec was mowing. And we put in 4 community gardens. About 30% of all restaurants became Blue Zone certified. And by the way, restaurateurs love it because they save money. Like some of the things are, instead of automatically getting bread when you sit down, you can get it, but you have to ask for it. Instead of automatically getting French fries with your sandwich, you automatically get fruit, but you can ask for the French fries. We convinced the grocery stores to tag healthy food, make it easier to create a checkout aisle with no unhealthy defaults. In schools, we convinced them to disallow eating in hallways and classrooms. That engineers out 8 hours of junk food eating. BMI goes down by 11%. You don't even take on the 900-pound gorilla, which is school lunches. We got 25% of the adult population to take a pledge, to do things like set up a garden, join a moai. We do it in school auditoriums. These were our walking moais, we called them. Take a purpose workshop and volunteer. After just 1.5 years, and we measured it, life expectancy went up by 3 years. We shaved about 2 tons off of their waste. And where the rubber hits the road, the city reported a 40% drop in healthcare cost. That brought out national media, Good Morning America, Harvard. Harvard's Walter Willett, writing in Newsweek, checked all of our data and found that the results were stunning. It worked not because we hounded 21,000 people to eat more veggies and walk. We changed their environment. And when you change the environment, the culture follows. But I do want to semi-close with one video in a very unlikely place, the reddest city of the reddest state in America, Fort Worth, Texas. 1 million people brought in a Blue Zone project. And this is 2 minutes. Oh, what happened there?
All right. When we rode into Fort Worth 3 years ago, Mayor Betsy Price was on a mission to rescue her beef-obsessed, obesity-plagued city.
You guys are on life support here. It's not so good.
We're really way down there.
Back then, they were one of America's least healthy cities, with soaring healthcare costs, stressed-out commuters, and overweight school kids.
Ready to rock.
But the health-conscious mayor found inspiration thousands of miles away, in remote places where people live longer and healthier than anywhere else on Earth. National Geographic Fellow Dan Buettner discovered the Blue Zones a decade ago. He took us to one of them, Sardinia, a couple of years ago.
The longest lived men on the planet live right around here.
People here are always on the move, often up hills, eat a mostly plant-based diet, and wash it down with a glass of wine.
Okay.
Family ties are important too. common threads throughout most blue zones.
What you've learned is there's no silver bullet.
It's 20 or 30 little things, but they're little things that you can transport from places like Sardinia and bring them home and have them work for you.
Back in Fort Worth, the mayor asked Buettner to help her do just that, convincing big steakhouses to put healthier choices on the menu,
Portobello mushroom is completely different.
Acorn squash?
having police hand out fresh vegetables and fruit instead of tickets, and encouraging everyone, even Sunday morning churchgoers, to exercise.
I don't even recognize that girl anymore.
Latasha Dandy says the Blue Zones project inspired her to shed 70 pounds.
My goal was to start changing little things to feel better. And then it was like I woke up and the weight was gone.
She's not alone. Fort Worth's child obesity rates have dropped 6%. In fact, a Gallup poll of America's healthiest cities says Cowtown is changing its tune.
We've jumped from 62 to 47. We jumped up 15 slots in 4 years. That's a long way.
They say everything's bigger in Texas. Well, it's the little things imported from places like Sardinia that are making Fort Worth healthier. Cynthia McFadden, NBC News, Fort Worth, Texas.
So I don't have to tell you guys that there's big health problem in America. 100 million of us are suffering from diabetes or pre-diabetes. 75% of us are obese or overweight. And for the first time in living history, life expectancy of our children is less than our life expectancy. That's not because we're stupid. It's not because we lack will or we lack individual responsibility. It's not because we love our children less than our parents loved us. It's because our environment has changed. Since 1980, over 50% of all retail outlets, whether it's where you get your tires changed or where you pick up your diabetes medicine, forces us through a gauntlet of sugar-sweetened beverages, chips, candy bars, snacks, etc. The number of fast food restaurants has gone up by a factor of 20 since the 1980s. It's impossible. And these foods are engineered to be irresistible, and they're cheap, and they're unavoidable. The amount of time we spend in our car is more than double. That's time that we could be walking, we could be on our feet. We've engineered most of the physical activity out of our lives. The secret to longevity does not lie in a pill or a supplement or a superfood or longevity hack or some anti-aging nostrum. The secret to longevity lies in looking at all of the environments that we spend our day in, that our communities spend from our home, our commute, our workplace, our schools, and our grocery store, and using evidence-based ways to shape those environments so the healthy choice is not only the easy choice, but it's the inexpensive choice, the most accessible choice, and the most alluring choice. We know exactly what the environments of longevity look like. We now have a blueprint that we know works. Now it's time for New Mexico to take that blueprint, make it their own, and become the healthiest state in America. Thank you very much.
And I hope that there's one thing that we have when we walk away today is that we have the art of possible thinking about our state, our communities, our cities, our tribal governments, our local governments, how we can create blue zones across New Mexico. So for that, we're going to put a stake in the ground today, and we're going to invite up our next speaker, Jerry Jones and Sayuri Yamada from Ancorum Health Foundation, to further discuss building healthy communities.
Ancorum Health Foundation is what's termed a legacy foundation or a health conversion foundation. And that just simply means in the foundation world, there's community foundations and private foundations. Legacy foundation is really comes from a transaction with the health system. And so our origin story really has two parts. There's Ancorum 1 and Ancorum 2. And Ancorum 1 really is this idea that our community in 2008, and here's the headline, sold half of Christus St. Vincent to Christus Health. And that transaction, for a lot of reasons, obviously because there was some financial distress and clinical distress, I think, that the health system was having back in 2008. The cash reserves were going down, financial performance was coming down, reputation wasn't great. And the community itself said, we need to find a strong partner to partner with. And so that transaction actually was the cornerstone and actually the origin of Ancorum, because our foundation was created at that moment and our endowment was created. The origin story too is fast forward to November of last year. And the headline there is, our community sold the other half of the hospital to Christus Health. And there's many, many more reasons, but for doing that, none of them around the clinical performance of the hospital. The hospital in the last 5 years has been one of the safest and the highest rated hospitals in all of New Mexico. Millions of dollars into a new cancer center, expansion of emergency rooms, and the private room initiatives. Things have been great there. For us, what we saw, and very similar to the experience Dan shared in his experiences across the world, we did what's called a windshield tour. As a foundation, we wound up getting with clinical staff and case managers with social enterprise and nonprofits and toured our community. And what we found, listening to all of these different voices about where things were, we found that if you drove 1 mile to the north of the campus of Christus St. Vincent, your life expectancy was 87 years old. And if you got in the car and drove 2 miles to the south of Christus St. Vincent, your average life expectancy was in the low 70s. That's a 17-year gap in life expectancy. And it was not related to how close you were to clinical access. And for us, it was the wake-up call. We know that hospitals can't solve all of the problems that we have in our communities. Dan has just profiled for the last hour all of these things, the health behaviors. But what we really understood was we needed to help focus on the social determinants of health. That was going to be our mission. And over the last 5 years, we've promoted that mission. And in August of this last year, we were able to convince our partners to take out our interest so that we could grow our endowment and double down on a new strategy to work towards social determinants all over northern New Mexico, so that a decade from now, maybe we see some of the same results that Dan was just showing in Fort Worth, Texas, and some of the other places around New Mexico, the country.
Yeah, well, exactly, just like what Dan said, health is more than just healthcare, and it really is about the environment and the community. And based on your experience and what you've seen, what formulated the new mission for Ancorum Health Foundation?
As the secretary mentioned, it's building healthy communities. That really is our mantra. And in many ways, the charge for Ancorum Health Foundation is to get in front of the crisis. Dan just mentioned multiple times about if you could get in front of those interventions, how much better it is for us as human beings, for families and everyone, and obviously helps in our longevity pursuit as well. And our mission beyond building healthy communities is really focused on 3 primary areas: prevention, access, and opportunities. Prevention of disease and addiction, access to, of course, healthcare, because healthcare is still an important component of vibrant communities and helping to keep us on our longevity track. But also opportunities for affordable housing, opportunities for educational attainment, opportunities for healthy aging. Those are all part of Ancorum's new mission for the next decade.
Well, Jerry, prevention, when you talk about prevention, can you kind of share a little bit of what are some of the initiatives that Encorum Health Foundation is working on?
You bet. And one of the great opportunities as board members of our local hospital was the ability to have an open invitation from physicians to be able to round with doctors on a routine basis. All of us were given those opportunities, and we observed what I think wasn't as much healthcare. We saw humanity in a lot of those circumstances. And for prevention for us, one of our grantees is the Sky Center. And the Sky Center is really dedicated towards suicide prevention in youth. And during one of those rounding at Christus St. Vincent, you're going through room by room with the physicians and meeting families. We saw a grieving family, mom and dad, grieving the loss of a youth.
Yeah, that's like, I mean, that I can't even imagine that experience because that must have had such an impactful, profound, emotions for you.
And to be able to say, how can we as a health foundation and our network of nonprofits, how can we get in front of this so it doesn't happen? So we worked with the Sky Center, their team. They've been a 3-year grantee of the hospital and Quorum, as well as the Community Foundation, because we fund the program together. They provide free counseling to over 1,200 kids over the last 3 years who either had suicidal ideation or who actually had attempted suicide. 500 of those kids are in routine immersive therapies and counseling. And the parents and the grandparents, many of the grandparents are raising these kids. They are actually able to attend and get toolkits in their own counseling to be able to help foster a more healing and more resilient place. And did you know that of those, their well-being of those 1,200 kids is 80 or 90% higher than it was when they began those therapies? So it's a great example of what prevention looks like in a community basis with nonprofits who are dedicated and trained to really do this and to really help evangelize parents and grandparents to be able to care for kids.
I know that's one example or initiative of prevention, but what about access? Share some kind of initiatives around access.
Again, one of the experiences that we saw, and it was a little jarring for me as a non-clinician to see the amount of detox and overdose from alcohol and drug abuse that we were seeing in our hospital. And seeing a patient have to go through a medical detox inside the hospital is not the most ideal setting, I think, for most of the clinicians that would be here in this room. And so we asked the question, why does it have to happen in the hospital? Why can't we find a partner to do this detox in community where we know patients have better success? And we found Santa Fe Recovery, who at the time was only doing social detox. And Quorum, through a $500,000 grant, inspired them to say yes and to retool their business model so that they could provide medical detox in community. They're on Galisteo Street now, right next to the Santa Fe County's Crisis Center. And that facility, over the last year, has seen 3,200 patients. 45% of those patients have gone through the entire medical detox program. And people who go through that are 83% more likely to go on and live sober after 6 months. It was a remarkable partnership. They continue to be thank you. And what's amazing is you can see this handoff patients and their families wind up in the emergency department. They don't get admitted. They don't stay in the hospital there. They go directly to that. And it's not just from Christus St. Vincent. It's Presbyterian on the south side. It's from Presbyterian in Espanola. It's from Alta Vista in Las Vegas and Holy Cross and Taos. All of those patients, as soon as they're notified, are able to be transferred immediately. So I think it's a great opportunity for us to see access outside the four walls of a hospital.
Okay. So Jerry, you talked about prevention, access. The third one was opportunity. Can you share a little bit more on some of the initiatives around opportunity?
Yes, opportunities for housing, especially for our unhoused people that we see every single day in this community. We were really struck during COVID because this community, as many communities across our state, created vouchers with our city, our county, and our state governments to make sure as close to 100% of the unhoused population was able to be housed in motels. In Santa Fe, it was mostly on Cerritos Road. And in the year that followed, we saw such improvement for health outcomes for the homeless, and to see how much better they did. And so we said with our partners with the city of Santa Fe and Santa Fe County, we should do this. We should find more permanent housing for these patients. And so the city came to us and said, we found a motel on Cerritos Road called the Lamplighter Inn. The city was thinking about buying it. We worked with a number of partners. In the end, the partners couldn't quite make it work. And so we went to our board of directors and said, if we don't, no one will. And so our foundation, the Ancorum Health Foundation, bought a motel on Cerritos Road, and it's going through its final permitting process right now. And when it opens, hopefully later this fall, 60 people will have permanent supportive housing and affordable housing in Santa Fe that right now are on the streets. And that partnership between the city and the county, the state of New Mexico, was remarkable. Our $3.5 million was matched by more than $9 million from all of these other partners so that that facility can be totally debt-free and operate for the next 20 years in this community. So, okay.
Jerry, you mentioned partnership and, you know, we are so incredibly honored to be able to partner with the state. And I remember when Secretary Schroer came up and shared with me her aspirational goal of New Mexico becoming a blue state zone. When we went up to you, can you maybe share why Ancorum Health Foundation is a partner in this? And, you know, why do we support New Mexico becoming a blue state? Blue
I
zone
think
state?
it's perfectly aligned, as you've just heard from our brief comments right now and from Dan's presentation. This idea of the social determinants of health, being able to make the healthy choice, the easy choice, that's what we aspire to do. All of us in whether it be in government, in the private sector, in the nonprofit sector, all of us are trying to make New Mexico better and aspire. With the fact that the governor and the secretary have said, we want to be a blue zone state. And we as a foundation believe in those core principles. And so how can we partner together and actually see that? Our strategy is the next 10 years. It took us 10 years of focus just on the hospital, and we had that same focus for the next decade on helping to make communities healthy.
Okay. Well, I know we talked a lot about like there's over 300 health conversion foundations that's similar to what we're doing at Ancorum, but can you kind of share with us what are possibly like 3 unique things about Ancorum Health Foundation?
First, because of this transaction that was announced last November, Ancorum Health Foundation is the largest foundation in New Mexico. And we take that very seriously. We take it with a great deal of humility, but also with the weight, because we see that our population health is not advancing the way we would like it to be. So there's a lot of focus on that. But I think even though we are a large foundation, we don't lead with our wallet. We lead with strategy and partnership. The lamplighter that we just talked about, the work with the Sky Center, and every grantee of the hundreds that we have between us and the Community Foundation, the hospital, and others are in this joint collaborative partnership where it's trusted. The nonprofits can give us feedback and we can give them feedback. And we believe that being able to make that work has really been a hallmark of our success. And the last thing is, from the very beginning, and I shared in 2018 when we began to see that windshield tour and began to look at public health data, data is key. Everything that is measured is valuable, and everything that's valuable is measured. That is our approach to this philanthropic work that we do. And we take that very seriously to build new partnerships with the state of New Mexico and our county and local officials, as well as community leaders across northern New Mexico, as we build out this infrastructure to say, we want to have impact in Mora and in Taos and in San Miguel and in Colfax counties and Rio Arriba counties and Los Alamos and all the 10 counties that we really serve. We really take that data as an important part of our culture and our values.
Well, thank you so much for joining us this morning as we kick off this vision of what it could look like if New Mexico becomes the first state in the nation to become a blue zone. Thank you again for joining the rebroadcast of Blue Zones Bound. A special thank you to Ancorum Health Foundation and the several other sponsors that made this event possible right here in New Mexico. I hope this event inspires all of us to make smarter decisions to age well right here in the land of enchantment.